Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire dominated ancient Mesopotamia from 911 to 609 BCE and pioneered psychological terror as military strategy. They systematically used mass deportations, relocating an estimated 4 to 5 million people across their territories while documenting their brutality in palace reliefs that still survive today. King Ashurbanipal's library records detail how they flayed captured enemies alive and displayed their skin on city walls as warning to other cities. When Babylon resisted in 689 BCE, the Assyrians didn't just destroy it, they diverted canals to flood the ruins and left pyramids of severed heads outside the gates. Their royal inscriptions openly bragged about these atrocities, treating mass executions and impalement as standard operating procedure. The Assyrians understood that fear could conquer more efficiently than armies, and they wielded it with devastating precision across the ancient world. Roman Empire. Rome controlled the Mediterranean from 27 BCE to 476 CE and committed atrocities on a scale matching its territorial ambitions. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE saw the entire city razed with over 50,000 survivors sold into slavery, while later sources claimed Romans sowed salt in the fields, though historians now dispute this detail. During the Jewish revolt, the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE resulted in approximately 1 million deaths, according to the historian Josephus, with survivors enslaved and the Second Temple destroyed, using its treasures to build the Colosseum. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul killed an estimated 1 million people and enslaved another million, systematically depopulating regions that resisted. After the Spartacus revolt, Rome crucified 6,000 captured slaves along the Appian Way, leaving their bodies to rot as a message. The empire that brought law and civilization to the Mediterranean built it on rivers of blood. Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire stretched from China to Eastern Europe between 1206 and 1368 and killed an estimated 30 to 40 million people, roughly 11% of the world's population at the time. When cities resisted Mongol demands, they faced total annihilation, as demonstrated in Nishapur, where sources claim every living thing, including cats and dogs, was slaughtered after the governor's son-in-law died during the siege. The siege of Baghdad in 1258 saw between 200,000 and 800,000 people killed in a single week, with the House of Wisdom destroyed, and so many books thrown in the Tigris that the water reportedly ran black with ink. The Mongols deliberately engineered humanitarian disasters, destroying irrigation systems that caused agricultural collapse lasting generations. Their conquest methodology was brutally efficient: offer, surrender, or face extinction. Entire populations learned that resistance meant death, and this calculated terror allowed relatively small Mongol armies to control the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Spanish Empire. Spain's colonization of the Americas beginning in 1492 caused a demographic catastrophe that reduced the indigenous population from approximately 60 million to 6 million, a 90% death rate over a century. While disease played a major role, Spanish policies of forced labor through the encomienda system, combined with outright massacres, accelerated the destruction. The Taino people of Hispaniola numbered around 250,000 when Columbus arrived, and within 50 years only 500 remained. Bartolomé de las Casas documented these atrocities in his account, describing how Spaniards trained dogs to hunt and kill indigenous people, and murdered children to prevent future resistance. Mining operations worked natives to death, extracting gold and silver that funded Spain's European wars. The conquistadors didn't just seek wealth, they systematically dismantled entire civilizations, viewing the indigenous populations as obstacles to be removed. What Spain called civilization, the Americas experienced as apocalypse. Portuguese Empire. Portugal pioneered the Atlantic slave trade that would transport approximately 5.5 million enslaved Africans across the ocean, nearly half of all slaves taken to the Americas. The Middle Passage killed an estimated 10 to 20% of captives, who were packed into ships with over 400 people, crammed into spaces only 5 feet high. Survivors faced branding and sale into Brazilian sugar plantations, where working conditions were so brutal that constant importation of new slaves was necessary to maintain the workforce. Portugal's intervention in the Kingdom of Congo systematically dismantled that African nation's infrastructure and society, forcing conversion to Christianity while extracting slaves and resources. Many captives died from disease, starvation, and suicide during the voyage, while those who survived faced lifelong bondage. The Portuguese treated human beings as cargo, calculating acceptable loss rates, the same way merchants calculated spoilage of any other goods. Their economic model required a constant supply of African lives to fuel colonial profits. Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire ruled territories across Europe, Asia, and Africa from 1299 to 1922, but its worst atrocity occurred during World War I with the systematic destruction of the Armenian population. Between 1915 and 1917, approximately 1.5 million Armenians were killed in what most historians recognize as the first modern genocide, complete with bureaucratic planning and execution. On April 24, 1915, Ottoman authorities arrested Armenian intellectuals and community leaders in Constantinople, eliminating potential resistance before implementing broader deportation orders. Entire Armenian communities were forced on death marches through the Syrian desert without food or water, while women and children faced rape, enslavement, or murder. The Ottoman government coordinated these massacres through official channels, using the cover of wartime to implement what they called the solution to the Armenian question. Survivors described watching family members die of starvation and thirst, while Turkish and Kurdish forces attacked the columns. Turkey officially disputes the genocide classification to this day, despite recognition by over 30 countries, and the overwhelming historical evidence. Belgian Congo. King Leopold II of Belgium personally controlled the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908, turning it into a vast labor camp focused on rubber extraction. An estimated 10 to 15 million people died, roughly half the population, through a combination of murder, starvation, disease, and brutality designed to meet impossible rubber quotas. The Force Publique militia enforced these quotas by amputating the hands and feet of those who failed to deliver, requiring soldiers to prove each bullet was used for killing by presenting severed hands. Edmund Morel and Roger Casement exposed these atrocities to international audiences with photographs of mutilated children providing undeniable evidence. Villages were burned for resistance, while entire regions became depopulated as people fled into the jungle or died. Soldiers sometimes hoarded hands to justify their ammunition usage, creating a grotesque accounting system that treated human body parts as receipts. International pressure eventually forced Leopold to cede control to the Belgian government, though the damage to Congo's population and society proved irreversible. British Empire. The British Empire controlled roughly a quarter of Earth's land and population at its peak, committing atrocities across centuries and continents. The Bengal famine of 1943 killed between 2 and 3 million people, with policies under Winston Churchill diverting food away from the region, while he made dismissive comments about Indians breeding like rabbits. The Amritsar massacre of 1919 saw General Reginald Dyer order troops to fire on an unarmed crowd trapped in Jallianwala Bagh, killing between 379 and over 1,000, depending on the source. During the Boer War, Britain pioneered concentration camps where over 28,000 people, mostly children, died in brutal conditions. In Kenya, during the Mau Mau uprising between 1952 and 1960, British forces detained tens of thousands in camps where systematic torture was official policy, with evidence only emerging after the British government was caught destroying records in 2011. The partition of India in 1947, driven by hasty British withdrawal, caused between 1 and 2 million deaths and communal violence. The empire that claimed to bring civilization left trails of corpses on every continent. French colonial empire. France's second colonial empire committed atrocities across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, with the Algerian War of Independence from 1954 to 1962 representing perhaps its worst crimes. French forces killed an estimated 300,000 to 1.5 million Algerians through systematic torture, summary executions, and village massacres, with General Paul Auceresses later admitting that torture was official policy. The Battle of Algiers saw French paratroopers use electric shock, waterboarding, and other methods against civilians, including women and children suspected of supporting independence. Earlier in 1945, the Sétif massacre killed between 6,000 and 30,000 Algerian protesters after they celebrated the end of World War II with calls for independence. French forces conducted ratissage operations that swept through the countryside, killing everyone in targeted villages. France used napalm and systematic brutality, attempting to maintain control over a population that increasingly rejected colonial rule. The French government only officially acknowledged the use of torture in 2018, over 50 years after Algerian independence, and with many archives still sealed. Russian Empire. The Russian Empire under Tsarist rule expanded across Eurasia through conquest, with the Circassian genocide of 1864 representing one of its most brutal campaigns. Russian forces killed or expelled approximately 90% of the Circassian population, with estimates ranging from 400,000 to 1.5 million deaths during the systematic clearing of the Caucasus region. General Yevdokimov methodically destroyed mountain villages in scorched-earth campaigns that Russian sources openly described as clearing operations. Surviving Circassians faced faced forced deportation to the Ottoman Empire, with mass drownings occurring when refugees were forced onto inadequate boats. Villages were burned, entire communities scattered, and those who remained faced Russification policies designed to erase their culture. The Russian government still refuses to classify these events as genocide, despite recognition by Georgia and Circassian groups. The empire built by the Romanovs stretched from Poland to the Pacific Ocean, and the Caucasus Campaign showed the ruthlessness required to maintain that territorial ambition against populations who resisted incorporation. Nazi Germany. The Third Reich under Adolf Hitler committed the most systematically documented genocide in human history, murdering 6 million Jews and 11 million total victims, including Roma-disabled people, LGBTQ individuals, and political prisoners between 1933 and 1945. The Holocaust represented industrialized murder with concentration camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, killing over 1.1 million people using gas chambers disguised as showers. The Wannsee Conference in January 1942 formalized the final solution, bureaucratically planning the extinction of European Jewry with detailed records that would later be used in the Nuremberg trials. Einsatzgruppe mobile killing squads conducted mass shootings across Eastern Europe, while Nazi doctors performed grotesque medical experiments on prisoners. The systematic nature of the genocide, complete with train schedules, what camp administration and meticulous record-keeping revealed how ordinary bureaucracy could serve extraordinary evil. Survivors bore tattooed numbers while liberating forces found mountains of shoes, eyeglasses, and human hair. The Holocaust remains the defining atrocity of the 20th century, demonstrating how modern state apparatus could be weaponized for total extermination. Soviet Union. The Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin committed mass atrocities across its territory with the Holodomor Ukrainian famine of 1932 to 1933, killing an estimated 3 to 5 million people through forced collectivization and deliberate grain confiscation. Stalin's policies took all grain from Ukraine while continuing exports abroad, with people arrested even for collecting fallen kernels from harvested fields. The NKVD executed 22,000 Polish officers in the Katyn massacre of 1940, then successfully blamed it on the Nazis until 1990, when the Soviet government finally acknowledged responsibility. The Great Purge saw mass executions, while the Gulag system killed an estimated 1.5 to 1.7 million prisoners through forced labor, starvation, and exposure. Stalin deported entire ethnic groups, including Crimean Tatars and Chechens, in cattle cars to Central Asia, with thousands dying during transport. The Soviet system combined industrial-scale violence with bureaucratic efficiency, creating a terror state that killed more of its own citizens than it lost in World War II. The USSR denied these crimes for decades, making accountability impossible until the regime's collapse. Japanese Empire. Imperial Japan's expansion across Asia during World War II resulted in war crimes that killed an estimated 3 to 10 million people, with the Nanjing Massacre of 1937 to 1938 standing as one of the worst atrocities. Japanese forces killed between 200,000 and 300,000 Chinese civilians and prisoners in 6 weeks, conducting mass rapes, mutilations, and killing competitions where officers competed over decapitation counts. The Comfort Women's system enslaved over 200,000 women, primarily from Korea, China, and the Philippines, forcing them into sexual servitude for Japanese troops. Unit 731 conducted biological warfare experiments, including vivisection without anesthesia, frostbite experiments, and plague bomb tests on Chinese villages, treating prisoners as expendable test subjects. The Bataan Death March forced 76,000 prisoners to walk 65 miles, with thousands dying from execution disease and exhaustion. Japan's post-war handling has been controversial, with textbook revisions downplaying atrocities, and some officials continuing to dispute the events. The scale of Japanese war crimes across Asia created wounds that remain unhealed in regional relations to this day. Khmer Rouge. Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge regime controlled Cambodia from 1975 to 1979 and killed approximately 1.5 to 2 million people, representing 21 to 25% of the country's population, in an attempt to create an agrarian communist utopia. The regime evacuated Phnom Penh in 3 days, forcing the entire urban population into the countryside, including hospital patients who died during the forced march. The Khmer Rouge executed intellectuals, professionals, and anyone associated with the previous government with even wearing glasses, considered evidence of education worthy of death. Tuol Sleng Prison tortured approximately 20,000 people, with only 7 known survivors, while children were forced to execute their own parents to prove loyalty to Angkar, the organization. The killing fields became mass graves, where victims were beaten to death with farming tools to save bullets. Systematic starvation through failed agricultural policies, combined with the purges of Vietnamese and Cham minorities to create one of the most concentrated genocides in history. The Vietnamese invasion of 1979 ended the regime, though Khmer Rouge leaders faced trial only in the 2000s. Rwandan genocide. The 1994 Rwandan genocide killed between 800,000 and 1 million Tutsi and moderate Hutu in just 100 days from April through July, making it the fastest genocide in recorded history. Radio broadcasts coordinated massacres, while neighbors killed neighbors with machetes and other simple weapons in a campaign of violence that reached approximately 10,000 deaths per day at its peak. Between 250,000 and 500,000 women were raped, often deliberately by HIV-positive perpetrators, as a weapon of genocide. Churches that should have been sanctuaries became massacre sites where thousands seeking refuge were slaughtered. United Nations peacekeepers withdrew after 10 Belgian soldiers were killed, leaving the population defenseless while the international community watched. The French military intervention Operation Turquoise remains controversial, with allegations that France supported the genocidal government. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda eventually prosecuted key perpetrators, though the psychological scars and HIV epidemic resulting from the mass rapes continue affecting survivors. The genocide proved that modern atrocities could occur with stunning speed, while the world failed to intervene despite clear warnings. Chinese Empire. The Qing dynasty ruled China from 1644 to 1912, with the Taiping Rebellion from 1850 to 1864, representing one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, killing an estimated 20 to 30 million people. Hong Xiuquan led a religious uprising creating the Heavenly Kingdom, while Qing forces under General Zheng Guofan responded with scorched-earth tactics and mass civilian killings. When Qing armies recaptured Nanjing, approximately 100,000 people died in 3 days of massacre, including surrendered rebels and civilians. The Qing deliberately destroyed entire regions to starve rebel-held territories, while flooding was weaponized when the Yellow River's course was altered. Reports from besieged cities described widespread cannibalism as populations faced total starvation. The war devastated China's most productive regions, with some areas taking generations to recover their pre-war population levels. Modern historians struggle with accurate death toll estimates as Chinese imperial records are incomplete, with some sources suggesting total war deaths could reach 100 million when including famine and disease. The Taiping Rebellion demonstrated how internal conflicts could prove even deadlier than foreign invasions. American Empire. The United States' expansion across North America and its international conflicts included systematic violence against indigenous populations, resulting in approximately a 90% population decline from 55 million to 6 million, with causes including disease displacement and deliberate massacres. The Trail of Tears forced relocation of Cherokee and other tribes in 1830, killed over 15,000 people during the march, while the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890 saw U.S. troops kill approximately 300 Lakota, including women and children. The Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 killed around 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho, with soldiers mutilating bodies, including children. Native American boarding schools implemented cultural genocide, forcing children to abandon their languages and traditions. During the Vietnam War, the My Lai Massacre in 1968 saw U.S. troops kill between 347 and 504 unarmed civilians, including women, children, and elderly, with some victims raped and mutilated. Lieutenant William Calley was convicted but served only 3 years of house arrest. While disease caused the majority of Native American deaths, U.S. policies of removal and the debate over intentionality in spreading disease continue among historians. The gap between American ideals of freedom and the treatment of indigenous peoples represents an ongoing moral reckoning. ISIS. The Islamic State declared a caliphate across Iraq and Syria from 2013 to 2019, committing genocide against the Yazidi minority in August 2014, with an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 killed and 7,000 women enslaved. The attack on Sinjar forced Yazidis to flee to Mount Sinjar, where thousands were trapped without food or water. ISIS sold Yazidi women and girls in slave markets, openly advertising prices for women and children while forcing conversions to Islam at gunpoint. The group filmed mass executions for propaganda, including beheadings, crucifixions, and prisoners burned alive in cages. ISIS systematically destroyed UNESCO World Heritage Sites, including Palmyra and parts of Mosul, viewing pre-Islamic artifacts as idolatry. The organization recruited children as soldiers and suicide bombers, while conducting public executions in Raqqa, its self-declared capital. At its peak, ISIS controlled territory the size of Britain across 2 countries. United Nations investigations documented the atrocities, with the genocide officially recognized by multiple governments and international bodies. The group's combination of medieval brutality and modern propaganda created a uniquely horrifying movement that attracted foreign fighters while terrifying populations